everyone. Welcome to the Bugcrowd Security Flash. My name's Kaseya. I'm the founder, chairman, and CTO of Bugcrowd. Today, I wanted to talk about the Kaseya REvil ransomware attack that we've seen over the past week or so playing out. Ransomware has been kind of topic du jour over the past 6 months or more. There's a lot of attacks going on. There's a lot of people being impacted. There's executive orders being signed, policy being created, and all sorts of different things. And it's almost, every other day we're hearing about an attack that's going on. This particular one, I wanted to talk about it, give you all an update on what happened, how it's all kind of playing out at this point in time, what you can do to protect yourself. The reason for that is that it's kind of unique. The other thing that we've heard a lot about this year is supply chain attacks. That started off with the SolarWinds breach near the end of last year. And has continued on with other breaches that we've seen throughout the course of 2021. With this particular ransomware attack, it actually combined those two ideas. So it was a supply chain attack with a ransomware payload that was executed by cyber criminals. And it was incredibly effective. It's been very disruptive to retailers, to small business, to all sorts of different folk. I think that sort of escalation or the escalation signaled by the combination of those two attack techniques and the fact that we've now got supply chain attacks being used by cyber criminals and not just by nation states. I think that's a pretty big deal, frankly. Looking at the way that ransomware operators are funded, the fact that their business model is obviously quite successful. And when they get proceeds from a take like this one, they get to reinvest it into better tooling to make them more effective next time. We've seen this progressive escalation over the last 12 months even on ransomware operator tooling. This is another example of that. So that's why I'm kind of interested by this and why I think everyone should be thinking about it. So what happened? Essentially, the REvil gang put together an attack chain on a system called Kaseya VSA. What that is kind of like a mothership for managed service providers. So they put this software in, and then they load clients and sub servers onto their customers to be able to basically manage their servers, their desktops, their infrastructure, and so on. So a managed service provider is basically an outsourced, look after my IT type of shop. And that's where the supply chain component of this comes in. The actual MSPs, which is the acronym for managed service provider, they weren't the kind of the end game target for REvil on this one. It was actually their customers. So how they did that, they attacked this particular piece of software, Kaseya VSA. As it turns out, there was a combination of an authentication bypass in that software and a couple of other things that you could do to basically do a file upload and then trigger the delivery of whatever you've uploaded out to the clients of that particular mothership server, so to speak. And that's really how that's ultimately how they delivered their payload. So they went out looking across the internet for internet exposed instances of VSA that had this vulnerability. It was basically O-Day. At this point, we're starting to hear that Kaseya was aware of some of the vulnerabilities that were exploited in this attack, but they hadn't gotten around to actually rolling out the patch to the customers. So there was really not a lot that could be done from a software security standpoint at that point in time. It was kind of open season for the REvil group. Once they were able to identify the issue, the systems that were internet connected and obviously affected by this issue, they executed their attack onto VSA. VSA then pushed it out to the different organizations that were customers of a given MSP that was running the server that they were attacking, and off it went from there. So basically, that's when ransomware was delivered onto the endpoints, the encryption routines started, and effectively all hell broke loose at that point in time. So that was around about 2 p.m. Eastern US time on July 2nd was when this all started kicking off. I'm a part of a bunch of different cyber threat intelligence groups, and it was a pretty exciting is not quite the right word, but there was a lot of activity as this all kicked off because it was a very widespread campaign, and the way it hit was very sudden. So from there, there's been some pretty interesting aspects to this. The ransoms themselves ranged the initial pass, and so once the systems were initially encrypted, and the message came up saying you've been ransomed. The pricing that was made available to people that had been ransomed to try to decrypt their stuff ranged between $45,000 up to $5 million. The interesting thing about REvil is it has a key infrastructure built into the malware itself that allows an operator to ransom an individual machine, an organization. There's a lot of flexibility in how this particular type of ransomware can be deployed, and they made a lot of use of that in the initial attack. After that, though, a couple of kind of interesting things started to happen. So the payment system for REvil started to kind of go on and offline, and their decryption system was doing a similar thing. The prevailing theory is that at that point in time, the attack had actually been so successful that they were pretty much DDoSing themselves. They were like a distributed denial of service against their own systems, because there were so many people trying to log in to do stuff, and there was so many ransomware instances finding home and doing things like that. So that was a pretty interesting thing to see happen. I think that speaks to how formidable the supply chain can be as a delivery mechanism for this type of payload, and the fact that they've since come out and said, yeah, we've infected around about 1 million machines at this point. So that's one piece that's pretty interesting. I think beyond that, what REvil then did the next day, I believe it was to basically come out and say, all right, you know what? If someone just pays us $70 million in one lump sum, we'll release the decryption keys for everyone. And then anyone who's been affected by this particular attack can decrypt their systems and get back to work. As I mentioned before, the cryptographic architecture of REvil actually allows that sort of thing. So that was a legitimate offer that they made. About 24 hours later, they actually dropped that price down to $50 million. I believe that was after Acer reported being hit out of Taiwan. So there's obviously escalations of the types of business and the size of companies that are being hit by this stuff, at which point the ransomware operator comes under a fair bit of pressure to close the deal and get things done. And yeah, really from there, it's continuing to play out. I think a lot of the organizations that I've been speaking to that have actually been affected by this, they're working out what to do. The FBI and CISA have released an advisory. Kaseya themselves have released a detection tool, and a whole bunch of advisory type stuff. Here's where all of this is up to with respect to the role that their software played in this attack. The general advice for people from them is, if you've got one of these systems, or if you believe you're working with a managed service provider that uses Kaseya VSA, if you actually own the system yourself, turn it off, get it off the internet straight away. At this point in time, it's probably already compromised if you haven't done that, but I think it's still pretty important advice to take if it's the first time you're hearing it. If you're an end user or an end customer of a MSP that you believe runs Kaseya VSA, basically getting in touch with them to understand what the risk looks like. The CISA advisory, which we'll post alongside this security flash, has got some pretty detailed technical explanation of how VSA operators and also member customers of VSA operators as an MSP can actually take steps to defend themselves. So we'll share that, and that's a very important and useful read. I think the two things that Bugcrowd can really help with that actually contributed to this attack being successful. One was that there were vulnerabilities in VSA in the first place. Kaseya, as I mentioned before, appeared to have been aware of those and were working on fixing them. That fix hadn't been deployed yet, and basically the bad guys beat them to the punch. So, in context of bug bounty programs, in context of vulnerability disclosure programs, all the different things that Bugcrowd can help organizations with in terms of getting input on where those vulnerabilities exist, that's part of what we can do that would have helped here. I think the bigger thing is that as you're interacting with that type of input, your organization starts to realize that, yeah, there are flaws sometimes. We actually need to build the ability to fix and the ability to push patches out to our customer base quickly. And that's just a business as usual thing that we need to be able to do. So I think that's a helpful piece. You were talking to a lot of software vendors at the moment that are seeing this trend in threat land and recognizing the fact that they need to up their game there. So that, I think, is actually a good outcome. all of the ruckus that's happening on the internet, notwithstanding some of the difficulty and obviously inconvenience the victims are suffering right now. The other piece was that VSA as a system, it has a lot of privilege. When you think about what it's doing, it's basically a master console for every organization that's a customer of the MSPs and all of their systems. And it's got a pretty hefty level of control. You've got administrative access, system root level access to servers, to desktops, to all sorts of different things. That sort of system probably shouldn't be on the public internet in the first place. One of the things that we've seen that kind of supports this is with COVID, with people working from home, with like a lot of the disruption to how people actually do work over the past 15 months or so, there has been a trend to basically expose systems to make them more accessible, to make it more flexible in terms of access from the workforce and different things like that. The downside of that is that the bad guys can see it too. So Bugcrowd's ASM products, our open scope VDP, open scope bug bounty programs, what hunters will tend to do in combination with what we've built into the platform is look for high priority systems or critical systems that are out there on the internet that look like they probably shouldn't be. And I think that probably would have helped, or it wouldn't have fully prevented the attack had REvil gone through and done everything with the exploit, but it would have reduced the number of MSPs that would have been vulnerable to this particular approach to exploitation in the first place. So those are some of the ways that we could help. And yeah, I think for listeners on this one, this is a pretty rapidly evolving space. Like what I was mentioning at the start around the escalation of sophistication of techniques used by ransomware operators, that's a real thing. That trend is definitely continuing. And at this point in time, supply chain attacks used to, prior to this, be commonly kind of thought of as the domain of nation states. In the case of SolarWinds and others, where it looks like that type of attack where it's stealthy, it's obviously a national security impact, and it's a bad thing. But nation state actors do tend to be a little bit gentler, shall we say, on kind of the impact they create when they conduct a hack. Cyber criminals, like looking at all the different things that happened with REvil after this attack took place, it's been pretty messy and pretty chaotic for everyone involved. So the idea of this degree of power coming into the hands of people that are using it, I think, a lot more destructively. I think that's a trend I'm definitely keeping an eye on at this point in time. So that's the security flash. Check the links that we've got underneath and that we'll send alongside this for actionable information. The IOCs as well, indicators of compromise. If you want to go looking through your systems to check and make sure that none of this is happening in your environment, you can use those, and they're fantastic. As I mentioned, the CISO FBI memo, I think, is probably the gold standard at this point around practical steps that can be taken, and they're keeping that up to date as well. So I recommend that one quite highly. But yeah, with the other pieces in terms of mitigating this type of attack in the future, I've gone through some of the things that Bugcrowd can help with. Give us a call. We're happy to help you out.